Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming today to our Leaders in Research series number 2. Today we're joined by Dr. Sharon O'Brien and Dr. Frank Smyth. Pilot Photonics is Frank's company, and Dr. O'Brien is a senior lecturer here in DCU. So we're going to talk to each person. We'll get a bit of context initially, then we'll go through the questions, and we really invite questions at the end then from yourselves. I'd like everyone to sign in before they leave, if that's okay. And we are going to record this, so I always kind of give a disclaimer that it's just their views, they're not representing their department, and all of that kind of stuff. So if people want to look at the video then, or we can send the link on after that. Okay. All right. So maybe just for context. Actually, I just introduced myself first of all. I always leave that out. I'm Linda from the EDGE program, which is a co-fund made up of Amber, Adapt and Connect. And Richard here is the manager as well. So I'm responsible for training and career development. So we'll just get a little bit of context initially. So Sharon, your discipline is, and you're currently working on.
My discipline is translation studies. That's the best kind of description of it. And for those who are not in translation studies, usually that means very little to them. So we do research on interlingual translation, training translators, their interaction with technology and that kind of thing. Yeah, right.
Very good. So Frank Smyth, I'm the CEO of Pilot Photonics. We're a startup based here on campus in DCU in the Invent Center, and we make photonic integrated circuits. So basically, essentially a type of laser, a new type of laser, where like in the 60s and 70s, they started integrating multiple electronic components onto a single chip. Now we're doing the same with photonic or optical components. So photonic integrated circuits is what we do.
Okay, all right. So we'll get into the questions now. So I'm going to bring you back to the days of your PhD and ask, was it always research? What was going through your mind at that time? Did you, in inverted commas, fall into an academic career, or what happened at that point?
Yeah, so I would maybe go back a little bit further, even to explain a little bit of the journey. So in my undergraduate years, when we got to the final year, that's when things became really interesting, I thought. And we were studying subjects that seemed quite interesting, but then also we were required to do some initial research on topics for assessments. And with the combination of the topics and the opportunity to research, that's when I sort of got really interested in the idea of research, and I kind of got hooked on that. And I had a magnificent opportunity towards the end of my BA, where one of our lecturers came into a classroom and said, we have this project going at the moment. It was EU funded. Anyone who's in machine translation might recognize this from a historical perspective. It was called Eurotra. And we're looking for someone who'd be interested in doing a master's by research. And I actually thought there would be a race from the classroom to her office. And in fact, there wasn't. But I was very keen to apply, so I applied for that, and I started this master's by research with Eurotra when it was coming to the very end of its life.
Okay.
And after that, actually, I went to industry.
Okay.
And it was when I was in industry that I decided I would like to go back and do a PhD.
Okay. So at that point then, you went into industry. Were you thinking if an academic position had come up or an opportunity to do a PhD then, would you have taken it, or was that a strategic decision? Or?
No, not at all. So I was in industry, but I was working in the software localization industry, and I did see an opportunity to offer teaching to our current students at the time on software localization, which was kind of a new area, let's say. So I started developing a module and offering that on a very part-time basis. And at the same time in the company, clients became interested in machine translation, which was not very popular for a long time. And there I saw an opportunity once the interest in machine translation was increasing to do some research on that topic. But the topic that I chose was very, very unpopular at the time. Nobody was really interested in it. And now some of the people in the room will tell you everyone wants to teach it and learn about it and do research on it and so on. So that was completely coincidental.
So your motivation then to go back into research, how did that happen?
I had a child.
Okay.
So I was in this company and I was traveling so much. I was on a plane every second week, and I had my first child, and I said, I can't keep doing this.
Okay.
So I decided, and I really liked the research aspect, I really liked teaching, so that seemed to be a direction to go in.
Okay.
So there was nothing really very planned, except as like, oh, I can't keep getting on a plane every second week with a 3-month-old baby. So maybe academia was a better choice.
Okay.
Not really realizing that in academia you travel a huge amount as well.
Was it difficult to get back into at that stage?
No, I didn't find it difficult at all. No, I didn't. I was, very keen on the topic that I wanted to research, and I liked the teaching on the side. So no, not at all.
So what would you say to people then if they're at their PhD stage or even undergraduate, when you reflect on your own story, like what would they need to be thinking? Or
my advice would be to, if you're deciding on whether or not to do a PhD, or you're halfway through your PhD and what will I do next, my advice would be to go out and work in industry for at least 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
When I did that, the learning curve was huge and the challenges were really significant, but I learned more in those few years in industry, I think, that have stood to me ever since coming back to do the research and so on. So I think that being out in industry, you'll learn a huge amount. And even if you decide it's not for me, I want to come back into academia, you bring with you a huge learning and credibility, I think. Especially if you're teaching something where people go out and work in the profession, having done that yourself, I think, you bring credibility, which is great.
So the people here today are interested in academic careers as well as industry. Talk to us a little bit about how you talk to postdocs about permanency, because it's a big challenge nowadays. Everyone wants to get a permanent job. People talk about security and everything, and it's changing everywhere. How do you talk to people about that?
So if someone comes to me, for instance, and says, I'd like to do a PhD, like one of the first questions I ask them is, where do you see yourself? And not that corny question, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? But if they say, I see myself only in academia, then I will always have a conversation with them, because the truth of the matter is you may not get that position. It's very, very difficult these days to come across permanent positions in academia. So if people have a sort of more open attitude that they could see themselves out in industry, having done a PhD and a postdoc, then I'm interested in supervising them. But if somebody tells me they're only interested in an academic path, I would have quite a serious conversation with them about the fact that that's possibly unrealistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think you would have got that advice? You say it was kind of easy for you, not easy, but to get back into academia. Do you think it's changed a lot then since?
I think it has changed a lot. It seems to me that there were more opportunities around that time when I was finishing my PhD. A lot of my own journey is around luck and being in the right place at the right time and knowing the right people, and things happen. And I think that can happen for a lot of people. But these days, it seems doesn't matter if you know the right people or you're in the right place. It might not be the right time. So you have to have more, you have to be open to more career paths, I think. I certainly didn't do my PhD thinking I'll be in academia forever. I hadn't planned really that far ahead, to be honest.
When you reflect, have you planned? I mean, because you say a lot of it's down to luck, but was there a plan in the background?
I suppose towards the end of the PhD, there was a plan in that I could see that there were opportunities opening up in the school where I am now. And of course, I was optimistic about applying or that it would be advertised and I would get through the interview process and I would get a position. And that all came into place. It fell into place. But I would say, you know, I had some people who were rooting for me, you know, so not that they made it happen, but that certainly they were making sure that if a position was coming up, that it was advertised around the right time, that would allow me at least to apply for it. So towards the end, I was certainly working towards an idea of, if a position comes up, I would like to apply, and I would like to see myself here for at least the time being. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What do you put down to your success?
Well, some of that being in the right place at the right time, knowing what's happening and, you know, where the opportunities are. But also, I think, being very open to opportunities. So not having a sort of a career path that is, you know, that it's not possible to change what you want to do. I think that a lot of what I have done in terms of research and so on, which I would, you know, attribute most of my success to, has resulted from being quite open to new opportunities and new paths, new directions, and also very much to working across disciplines. So I would certainly say that has worked really well for me to you know, find sort of synergies with people and research in other areas that you can meld or join in with your own and kind of, you know, create new ideas and new directions. So.
And can you talk a little bit about challenges that you might have faced, or things that might have come up against you in your path, in your journey, that you may not have foreseen? Or
So one of the challenges I think that has been the biggest for me is where we sit in terms of our discipline. So some of us in the room, we'd say, right, we're in arts and humanities quite strongly, but we're also in the ADAPT Research Centre. And ADAPT is very, you know, computer science oriented. So how do you get to a position where you're in arts and humanities, but you're working with computer scientists and you're comfortable in that position? And that has been, I think, one of the big challenges. So when you apply for funding, you might be applying to the Irish Research Council, or you might be applying to SFI, and you're having to make a case for where you are, for where you sit in your discipline, and how you cross over into other disciplines and what your relevance is, and maybe what you bring that the computer scientist on his or her own doesn't have, the value that you bring from arts and humanities and so on. Now that is challenging, because a lot of conversations that I've had with people in the same position is that you fall between two stools.
Okay.
So you're neither kind of very traditional social science, and you're certainly not computer science or other kinds of science. And so often you get this, well, you know, good idea, but that's not really relevant to this call. So that, I think, has been the biggest challenge.
How have you overcome that?
So I suppose really pushing the interdisciplinarity thing, and trying to persuade funders that if you look at a problem from one particular point of view, you only see, you know, a certain solution or a certain idea. What do you bring if you come from a different discipline? What added value do you have? So really trying to be very, I suppose, clear about that in your own head. Trying to be confident about it. It's not always easy, you know, when you feel, especially in arts and humanities, we always feel a little bit like we're not that valued, and there's a lot of emphasis on STEM, science and technology is where it's at, and we have to teach all the young people about maths and science. And if you're coming from a linguistic or a language background, you go, oh, why do I not matter? Why does my discipline not matter? So trying to always kind of see the value in what you do and really communicating that in a way that the other discipline can really understand and appreciate. But I don't think that comes easy. I think actually you have to show over time by you know what you do, the research that you do, what is the value that you bring that would not be there if it was just one discipline by itself. Yeah.
There's a sense, you know, especially for myself looking on into research, it seems like a very challenging career to have.
Yeah.
You know, you seem to be working all the time.
Yeah.
From a lifestyle perspective, is that the case, or is it just about being clear, okay, this is my work and this is my life, or are you writing up papers at the weekends, or, you know, that kind of sense?
I try to avoid that, I have to say. Family is really important to me. My personal life is very important to me, and I think academics work too hard these days.
So do I.
I think that there's so much pressure, especially when you're at the earlier stage of the career. Publish, publish, publish. Apply for more grants, etc. And and even the fact that we're talking about career paths today, that wasn't something that we did say 10, 15 years ago. So there's a lot of pressure. And you might feel like, yeah, I have to work right up into the evening. I have to work at the weekends and so on. And sure, maybe if there's a deadline for submitting a paper, you might do that. But I try my best to divide up my personal life time and my family time from my work time. I remember the lady who came to our class and said, we have a scholarship for anyone who's interested in doing a master's. When I was working with her, she's not with us anymore, but when I was working with her, there was one day where I went into her office and she said, I'm not working very well today. I'm kind of feeling tired. I'm not really making any progress. I'm going to go home for the afternoon. And I'd never heard anyone saying that before. You don't leave your job, and just go in the middle of the day. And she explained that, tomorrow she would be much better and much more efficient and get a lot more done if she went home for the afternoon. And I thought, that's very eye-opening. That's the way to do it. Don't keep working through when you're really, really tired and not being productive. Go home, do something nice, and the next day you'll be much better at it. So
would you have noticed a difference when you were in industry compared to when you came back then to academia?
Yeah, so the position I had in industry, funnily enough, was more like in an R&D department. So we didn't really work over hours, but the people in production pulled all-nighters. And I couldn't understand that either. I thought, this is bad management, basically. If you're pulling an all-nighter, something went wrong, and it shouldn't happen all the time. So, when you finished your project, you do your learning from the project. What did we learn? We should have learned how not to have to pull an all-nighter every single time a project is coming to an end. So there was that ethos, I think, in the companies that I worked for, that you just gave 110% of your life to the company, and I don't really subscribe to that, I have to say.
So tracking your profile and knowing a little bit that you are a mentor on the Aurora Leadership Program for women, do you have specific advice that you would talk to the female postdocs in terms of particular challenges? I mean, there's a lot of, it's quite current to talk about the challenges and in STEM particularly. Do you have anything to say about that?
So I don't know if everyone knows what Aurora is in the room. So it's a program run by the Leadership in Education Foundation. Is that the name of it? Yeah. And it's for women in leadership in higher education. And it's interesting because women in leadership, it's really about women who want to be in leadership, I think, as opposed to women who are in leadership. There's a program over several days throughout the year where all of these women come together and discuss aspects of leadership. And it has been very interesting to listen to what goes on at those particular days. And some of the things that I took away from it were, and I think this applies to everybody, but women I think do suffer a little bit more in certain respects. Be courageous, stick your neck out. One thing that stuck with me from the first time that I did it was find your voice. This is something that they talk about, find your voice. I'm sure some of the people in the room who know me would say she's no problem talking. But actually, there are a lot of occasions where women might say, I have something to contribute here, but there's too much going on. There are too many people making points. and I'll just be quiet. I'll keep it to myself, or I'll say it later. So I think Aurora has really helped in that respect. Just, you have to do it with a measure. So this is not about just saying everything that you think all the time at every meeting, but not being afraid to voice your opinion as a woman in an academic setting. Yeah.
So this is your final question,
Okay.
Sharon. In terms of what's changed in the world of work and research, when you were starting out, do you think there's things people need to be more aware of now that are, maybe more important now or more relevant now that maybe weren't back then?
Yeah, so I think one of the big changes has been this focus on high impact journal publication. So everybody is under a lot of pressure, especially if you have an academic position. If you work in the UK in particular, the focus is completely on their REF scheme, and whether you're REFable, they now have a word for that. And, so it's all about the caliber of the research that you produce, and whether the university can put you forward as an example of a really excellent researcher. And that's about publishing in very high impact journals. So we're all under a lot of pressure to do that. It's something that you should take on board, but also with a measure of discipline as well, not to be under massive pressure to, publish in only the highest impact journals, because there are some drawbacks to that as well. That's one thing. And then the second thing is that social media is, I think, has come to play a big role now in academic circles, in academics' lives. And I've reluctantly engaged with that recently, because we're running an EU-funded project, and dissemination is an important aspect of that. And so in engaging with that, I see some really excellent opportunities for people to say, here's what I'm doing, and here's what we're thinking at the moment, and so on. But there's a lot of hot air. So I would say, use social media, but you use it judiciously, and don't be posting everything that you do every day, because people would then realize that it's just self-promotion for no reason whatsoever. So yeah, that would be
great. Okay, thanks. Ready, Frank?
Ready.
Okay, so can you elaborate a little bit on your experience of being a postdoc? Because I've known you through Connect, which we're kind of saying is industry. I know it's education and everything, but
yeah,
what that was like.
Yeah, so I suppose my just again to go back a little bit further than that as well. So I think a very similar story actually. It was just in one of the lectures one day, coming towards the end of my bachelor's degree, and the professor Liam Barry at the time just said, we have some research masters positions going at the moment, and I was really enjoying college, and the thoughts of getting paid to continue to go to college sounded like a dream come true. I had previously talked to a cousin of mine who had kind of gone through a research masters as well, and it appealed to me a lot. So I went that path. Then I kind of, to be honest, I suppose nearly fell into the PhD, in that I never intended to do one, but I was actually in Australia at the time after my masters, and I was offered it. And when I was offered it, I kind of found it hard to turn down then,
Okay.
And it was a tough decision, because I was having a great time in Australia, making plenty of money in industry, and then coming back to kind of what felt a little bit like Groundhog Day at the time. So I was at the start particularly kind of saying, Janie Mac, what have I done here? But anyway, stuck with it, and at this point, very, very thankful that I did. That was great. And then the postdoc just came as a natural follow-on to that, as it often does. There was additional funding through CTVR, which is the precursor to Connect. And so I ended up just kind of continuing on in the lab as a postdoc. And it was within that time that I started looking at kind of commercialization side of things, and entrepreneurship, and spin outs and startups and things like that. And so that we started basically applying for kind of technology development grants. So we did an Enterprise Ireland, what was called a Commercialization Plus at the time. And so I guess I have my kind of family there's a history of entrepreneurship and things like that in the family, and so I knew that was the kind of direction that I had in mind. And so this seemed like a great opportunity, a way to kind of couple what I was loving about the research, the kind of the state of the art technology and all that side of things, with the potential for entrepreneurship and hopefully one day a big payday. So that's kind of the story.
In the startup environment that you didn't get being a postdoc or in academia?
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of see. So typically people talk about two routes out of, or two routes. So you continue after a PhD, either continue on in academia or you go to industry. But actually entrepreneurship I kind of see as a third route. It's not really, you're not really going to industry because you're setting up your own thing. And it's a nice balance between the two, I find. You kind of maintain a lot of the independence that you would have had as a researcher and as an academic, at least certainly in the early parts of the business or the company's life. But you also continue to work on the kind of the technology and the research that you enjoyed. So that aspect of it is very nice. So
I know I've spoken with a few of the postdocs, and they kind of feel a bit daunted by the idea of getting involved in commercializing an idea, or it's like, oh, I wouldn't know how to market it. I don't have those skills.
Yeah.
So what do you say to those things?
Yeah, I say I totally understand that, but there are ways to minimize the risk. You can de-risk a lot of it by taking the early steps still within the research group that you're part of, let's say. So there are plenty of different programs run by Enterprise Ireland in particular, but also through the European Commission and things like that, that allow you to kind of do proof of concept work, to build prototypes, and to start writing business plans, and kind of doing potentially customer demonstrations and things like that eventually. So you can kind of do it as a process, and really then only take the jump when it looks like there's something real there, and so that's a nice way of doing it. I mean, I was kind of naturally drawn to that side of things. So I used to go off to the conferences, but instead of going to the technical sessions, I'd go to the market watch sessions and things like that. So I had that's kind of where I was drawn to, I suppose. But
was that a plan you had in your head, or was that just?
I always wanted to get into entrepreneurship. Absolutely, definitely wanted, and I saw the PhD was a route to becoming expert, fairly unique in your set of skills, and to the point where you could potentially do something kind of differentiated and disruptive. Now, I mean, personally, I wouldn't be a great kind of ideas person, so I'm kind of piggybacking on other people's ideas. So where a lot of people, so our company has licensed IP from DCU and from Trinity and from Tyndall. Those were the kind of three core patents that the company was founded on, and I'm not an inventor on any of those. I have subsequently been an inventor on a couple of the patents that the company has produced, but that's not my kind of forte, the new ideas. So I never felt like I was a great researcher, but I've a lot of kind of drive, and I'm good at getting things done, and I'm good at writing proposals, business plans, bringing in funding and things like that. So that's it was a kind of a natural fit for me.
So to follow on then, you'd say they are your successes, I guess, knowing what you're good at and doing them.
Yeah, I think that's important. And it's not about kind of being negative or being down on yourself or anything like that. It is kind of just a value, like being kind of a little bit self-critical from time to time, just to see, like, and it kind of goes back to what you mentioned. I mean, there are very few academic positions. I personally never particularly wanted one. In fact, I didn't ever want one. But
that would be my next question.
Yeah, well, so jumping ahead, but yeah, I think I probably wouldn't have made it anyway, even if I had. So yeah, it's good to recognize your strengths and kind of and go after them, but also the passion as well. I've wanted to go this route for a long time, and it's nice to, it's kind of exhilarating when you can kind of create your own path, bring in money to fund your ideas and your kind of vision, let's say. Yeah, so it's nice. That's
so on the flip side of your successes then, what challenges have you faced?
Yeah, well, entrepreneurship is very it's a kind of roller coaster, you know. You get big highs when things go well, and big lows when they don't. So I mean, the company has run out of money completely in the past, to the point where we were about to shut the company down. I had to leave the company and get a day job in Connect, and kind of then try and keep the company going in the background. Over a few years, I kept the engineering team in place. It was a small team at the time, just 2 people, but their work was more important. I was passionate enough about it that I would be willing to kind of work the long hours and do it in the evenings and weekends and stuff like that, to maintain it and keep it alive. So the challenges are kind of I suppose getting customers to pay for things. As an engineer, you kind of you try and put bells and whistles on things, but that might not be the what a customer is willing to pay for. So it's I suppose the getting out and talking to customers early, finding out what they might want, and building that rather than what you think they might want. I suppose that's a kind of a general rule, not just academic kind of spin outs, but companies in general.
How would you describe your learning curve from going into entrepreneurship as a researcher, somebody who's been a postdoc for a while?
The learning curve, I suppose, well, going back to that aspect where you're kind of on your own now, whereas before, like while I was a postdoc, there was a steady supply of funding. You were relatively comfortable, although there were short-term contracts, one after the other. Let's say you were essentially employed.
Yeah.
Whereas then when you're kind of on your own, when you go out, when you first take the break, kind of take the jump outside of the university, let's say. So following your Enterprise Ireland kind of development, prototype and business plan development, one day you have to actually form the company and ideally either take some investment or have a customer pay for something from the very start. And there's a big learning curve associated with kind of that lack of support, I suppose. But the way I felt about it, I mean, I would have a certain attitude to risk that not everyone might have, but I felt that I was well enough qualified, and the funding landscape in Ireland was and around the world was pretty good at the time. So even if things went wrong, I should be able to pick something up again after that, you know. So that was I suppose that's the learning curve.
How important is it for you as an entrepreneur to publish or to still maintain?
Yeah, well, we do. The company publishes. So we just had a paper published actually in the last few days. We've another one accepted there recently by the European Space Agency for a conference that they're running. So I'd say it's not important or critical. It kind of becomes a marketing tool. after a while. So that's for the, let's say, for the entrepreneur themselves, or for the company. In terms of people that we hire, it's a nice to have, but not necessarily essential. Kind of industry experience, again, going back to your point, industry experience is more valuable, certainly.
So to the postdocs that might be here today, or PhD students who are thinking about entrepreneurship, what would you advise them? Would you say
give it
yes,
a go?
no,
Give it a
or
go. Do, like,
they should know themselves, or what?
Should they know themselves? I think so. What I've been saying to people in Connect and our own guys and things like that, like, some of the easiest grants you can get are Enterprise Ireland grants. They have much lower kind of criteria than let's say some of the SFI ones and the Irish Research Council and things like that. So it's for a PhD or a postdoc, even if you don't ever intend to form a company, it's a good way to get funding in your own name. You can get a couple of $100,000 or even 300 grand for a couple of years of work that and it is research. It continues to be research work. They call it research commercialization. The early stages of it are kind of more R&D, and you get the benefits then, both soft skills of kind of project management and kind of some customer interaction and stuff like that, and you still get to carry on your research. So it's a real win-win scenario. You do have to produce a business plan, but that's not very different to writing normal funding proposals in terms of kind of the style and content and stuff like that. So it's all really good kind of experience for a researcher, even if you don't ever intend to form a company, I would say.
It's quite interesting, actually. Yeah. Okay, that's our questions done for the panelists from me. Do people here have questions? Please don't be shy. Yeah.
I wanted to ask any of you. You know, now there is all this interdisciplinary research, and everybody says, "Oh yeah, everyone, giving money is interested in this." But for me as a researcher, the doubt that I have, maybe it's too personal, but is that if I have an idea that kind of goes very far from my area of research, which is machine translation and humans, I feel that even if I'm interested in another idea and I want to do it, I feel kind of insecure because I say, I don't know anything about that other topic, even if I'm interested. So do you think nowadays it's more flexible to go onto those paths, even if you don't have all that background? I just was very confusing, my question.
No, it's not confusing. No, because I associate with what you're saying, and I think
there is so much machine translation and humans we can do, right? There are a lot of people interested in that, so you kind of take another path.
Yeah, but so I think it's one of the most rewarding and yet one of the most challenging things, I think, to really try and be interdisciplinary in your research. And there's a lot of debate about what's interdisciplinarity versus transdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and so on. But take all the flavors. If you go in another direction that you don't know much about, you've a lot of groundwork to do, and you always will feel like you don't know enough. So finding people who want to work with you, I think, is the key. And that is not easy. I think that selling your idea to somebody who hasn't thought about machine translation or human interaction, for example, and they're coming from a whole other field, it's not easy. And I don't think there's a recipe that one can follow, but I think that what you have to do is build some credibility in the sort of new direction that you want to go in, and then people start looking and saying, oh yeah, okay, well, I haven't thought about the problem that I usually think about from that perspective. And once you have a little bit of field work done or progress made, then people are more interested in collaborating. But it takes time, and even when you think things are going brilliantly, sometimes it can fall apart. So we have had situations where we've been working really well with colleagues in a whole other field, and when you try to write a paper together, you hit brick walls, and you realize there are these disciplinary walls that are invisible that nobody really talks about, in terms of how you look at problems or talk about them or write about them. And even though you have the best intentions of the world, trying to come together and agree on a way to represent that research in a paper is sometimes very, very challenging. So yeah, I think it's, for me, it's certainly one of the most rewarding things to do, but it is certainly also very challenging.
Another question?
Have you both been through a lot of change in your career forwards? Which is, there's a lot of uncertainty around a research career. Do you have any advice for dealing with the stress of that? And second part, do you now feel like you're set in your career, or is that uncertainty always with you?
Yeah, I suppose I guess as you get older and more settled, it becomes a bit harder because you have responsibilities, mortgage, kids, things like that. So certainly when I was going through all the path that I described earlier, I didn't pay it much attention. I was just floating a little bit, happy enough to go from one contract to the next, happy if I could push the salary up a little bit, and things like that. But then, yeah, I would, as you get that a little bit older and you've great responsibilities, then yeah, it's definitely something that you have to pay more attention to, and it might be a big draw to industry then, where you might be able to secure something a bit more solid and permanent. But and then to move on to the second part, then for me, is it the path? Yeah, until the company is successful, and I mean, generally what entrepreneurs are aiming for is one or two things: either grow a big successful company or get it to exit where it's bought by somebody else, and so that's I'm on that path for now until one of those things happens.
Yeah. I think there's always uncertainty. I mean, I am in a very lucky position that I have a so-called full-time permanent job, right? We don't really know, will these always be full-time permanent jobs? The world changes so rapidly, and disciplines change and the needs of industry change, and that has an impact on academia. So I always wonder, well, what's the next 10 years going to be like? What are the next 15 years going to be like? And sometimes wonder whether I should leave and go back to industry, and would that be better? And, so I think there's a constant thinking about the situation that you're in and how that's going to change or develop. One thing that we should try and avoid, I think, therefore, is to become so deep in a niche that you feel like nobody would want to employ you outside your specialization in teaching and research. And that comes back to what I suggested earlier, is get out there, even if you get an academic contract, maybe take a year out and go and spend it in industry. And another thing that I would suggest, which I didn't do, but if I had the foresight previously, I would have tried to do some volunteering. I think that would really open our minds up to what's relevant and what matters if you come back into industry or academia. So and you never know what kind of opportunity that's going to bring. So being open to new opportunities all the time and not being kind of stuck in one little discipline, I think is quite important. Yeah.
Another question? No? Okay. Well, thank you both so much. It was so interesting. I hope you all got something out of it. I found it very interesting, and it's a big learning curve for me because I haven't come from research at all, so I'm learning all the time. So thanks a million.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.